Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. Have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. Coming down to the wire here, of course, in terms of the election. So we have a lot of news for you there. Trump has his big Madison Square Garden rally yesterday, and it was really something. Even the Trump campaign distancing themselves from some of the remarks that were made at that rally. So we'll bring you all of that. We've, of course, also got all of the latest polls to try to figure out where this race is. Spoiler alert, it's still 50-50 and very close. We've got some comments from Michelle Obama directed towards men in particular, and also a little hot mic moment from Kamala Harris where she seems to indicate that they have ground to make up there among men in the country. So we'll bring you that as well. Trump winning some Muslim American endorsements in the state of Michigan. Absolutely wild scene there given past history. Jeff Bezos deciding seemingly to curry favor with Trump by withholding an endorsement by his paper, The Washington Post, stoking a lot of controversy there. The LA Times also deciding not to endorse in this race. They're giving a different reason, though, for their rationale, so we'll break all of that down for you. We have Dr. Trita Parsi on to talk about the very latest with regard to Iran and Israel. Israel finally launching that, what they describe as a retaliatory attack towards Iran. There's a lot that's interesting there, so we'll get into that as well.
Absolutely. Can't wait for that. Before we do, thank you to all of our premium subscribers. We're coming down to the wire 8 days until Election Day right now. We are filming content today with Logan Phillips, our election partner. He'll be here on election night as well. Go ahead and sign up, breakingpoints.com, so you get exclusive access both to some of that premium election content. Our predictions will drop there first on who's going to win, what our electoral maps, and all of that will be, in addition to some great subscriber benefits on election night. So breakingpoints.com, you can become a subscriber. But as Krystal mentioned, Trump was at Madison Square Garden. Let's get to it.
I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico. All right. Heck yeah. It's a cool black guy with a thing on his head. What the hell is that? A lampshade? Look at this guy. Oh my goodness. Wow. I'm just kidding. That's one of my buddies. He had a Halloween party last night. We had fun. We carved watermelons together. It was awesome.
In fact, she is the devil, whoever screamed that out. She is the Antichrist at her. And there's not one moment I've ever been with him off camera where he's spending his time grousing about people he hates. Ever. He's talking about the people and the country he loves in his private time. Trust me.
You know something, Trump maniacs? I don't see no stinking Nazis in here. I don't see no stinking domestic terrorists in here. The only thing I see in here are a bunch of hard-working men and women that are real Americans, brother.
So that was before Donald Trump even took the stage. It was, as I described, full MAGA. I would put it as a mini RNC, effectively. Lots of controversy this morning over Tony Hinchcliffe's joke there about Puerto Rico. In fact, the Trump campaign themselves have come out and they've distanced them from it. Let me go ahead and read you what they said in a statement this morning. Quote, "The joke does not reflect the views of President Trump or the campaign." So I'm sure there will be a lot of bedwetting over this on both sides. What I mean by that, Krystal, is not the liberal freak out over it, but on the Republican side, there's a big debate over why should you even apologize over a joke. I like Tony. I think he did a great job specifically at the Tom Brady roast and previously. The thing is, and this is what I've been thinking about, the reason why is that you shouldn't necessarily just have an edgy campaign guy, an edgy comedian at a campaign event, because it appears as if that is a reflection of the campaign, as opposed to at a roast or elsewhere. Now, look, in general, if making a joke about Puerto Rico is literally enough to push you over the edge, I don't know, I think it's frankly kind of ridiculous, but maybe people vote that way. The point remains that there are 500,000 people of Puerto Rican descent, apparently, in the state of Pennsylvania.
Really
I saw
has one of the largest
our old
in
friend
the country.
Chuck Rocha, who runs that Latino-focused Nuestra PAC or whatever, and he's already raising money. He's like, give me money so I can text this to everybody. Bad Bunny came out and endorsed Kamala Harris immediately after this came out. So look, will it make a big difference? I don't know. But I think that the point stands that in general, 9 days out for this, the Puerto Rico joke, it just doesn't appear to be helpful. I guess the counter case to what I would say is everyone said that about Springfield. Everyone said it about, God, I covered 2016, Judge Curiel, Khazir Khan, and all that stuff. Didn't matter. If anything, the controversy, he's so racist this time, look at this, all of that, it didn't work, right? So I'm not so sure it's gonna be like totally determinative. The way I saw MSG and the rally yesterday, I tweeted this was basically a mini RNC, the most storied venue in the country. If their goal was to dominate the conversation, to have a gigantic media spectacle, I think they succeeded. That conversation now centers around them. And the only question is it 2016 when that dynamic is to his benefit, or is it 2022 when this being on full display is going to repel voters? I genuinely have no answer to that question.
Yeah, I mean, it was like dark RNC. This was like, we're going to let
that was pretty similar,
freak flag fly. I mean, you got not just, to fixate on Tony is honestly to miss the overall tenor.
I agree, but even the rest of that stuff was at the odds.
Even if you're just looking at Tony, not only did he, call Puerto Rico a pile of trash in the ocean, there were insults at Jews, at black people. He said they were, carving watermelons instead of pumpkins. There were insults at Latinos, disgusting sexual joke, even just with Tony. But even if you put that aside, you got this other dude calling Kamala literally the devil and the Antichrist. The whole thing, the whole positioning of it is this sort of like worshipful, situating as Trump as like gonna save us, like the Jesus Christ figure, against Kamala, the Antichrist. You had another speaker who referred to her effectively as a sex worker, saying she had her, pimplet handlers. You had Hulk Hogan at another point. We played part of his comments. Another point, he seemed to make a Hawk Tuah joke about Kamala. You had Byron Donalds, who is a black congressman, introduced literally with Dixie, the de facto anthem of the Confederacy. And then, of course, you have Trump doing his normal thing, talking about the enemy within, talking about using the Alien Enemies Act, which was last used for Japanese internment. So, the overall question of the rally or why it even existed, to me, it's less about an electoral consideration, and it's more about creating a sense of inevitability and sort of like domination. And we already see, and we're going to talk about the Washington Post, like Jeff Bezos pulling his endorsement. You see some elites basically hedging their bets, trying to not get on Trump's bad side because they're afraid of that quote unquote retribution that could come. So having this very, ominous spectacle in the center of a very diverse, deep blue city, I think that's more what it's about. And it ties into, there could be a vibe with it because it seems it's like a lot of bravado. It's basically projecting like, we are already so confident that we've won this thing that we can send Tony Hinchcliffe out there to insult a major critical demographic group in a swing state. Like, it almost has the vibes of like Hillary Clinton popping the champagne on the plane on election day, which also, by the way, happened on the way to New York. But for them, it's sort of true because even if they lose, they're going to claim that they won. And that's the other goal of this rally and the one they're doing in New Mexico, the one they're doing in Virginia, whatever. Trump constantly talking about how, they've got him with 93% odds that he's going to win, et cetera, bolstering poly market and all of these odds makers that show a wildly improbable probabilities in favor of Trump, is to create the sense of inevitability so that if they lose, their supporters will all be primed to think this could not have been fair. It must have been rigged. And so, that's part of the goal of this rally as well. And it was like, I found it very disturbing. I found it really ugly. And to your question of like, the electoral implications and the calculus that went into this, et cetera, we were talking after the Rogan interview about how the goal for Kamala in these final days is like, I can be commander in chief. The goal for Trump is like, I'm not a fascist, I'm a bro, right? Hanging out with Joe Rogan. Don't think that this rally really served his interests in making him seem less scary, less dark. It, if anything, feeds into the closing message of the Harris people of like, listen, you should take seriously what John Kelly, Mark Milley, Jim Mattis, Mike Pence have to say about who this guy actually is. So, I don't buy that it serves them electorally. And they also have a different coalition than they did in 2016. In 2016, it was all about juicing the white working class vote. Worked for them, obviously, enough to win in the Electoral College. This time, they are really reliant on eating into Democratic margins with Black and Latino men. So that, I think, is part of why, whereas in the past, in 2016, if there was some racist joke made or whatever, Trump would never have apologized for it. I think the fact that they're trying to court that different coalition or really electorally dependent on that different coalition is what leads even the Trump campaign to be like, that was too far.
See, I don't know. I have a totally different read. I didn't see that. I mean, I think you're primed to see darkness, so you're seeing darkness. I'm trying to look at it as like basically an entertainment event when you literally have Hulk Hogan like ripping his shirt off and coming out and be like, we're not Nazis here. And then you had, Tony Hinchcliffe and the comedian. The aspect of it to me was just pure camp and entertainment. You could see darkness if you want to, and you're taking it seriously. But the whole point of Trump is that most people don't take him seriously, specifically the people who vote for him or are inclined to do that. So for them, like they see, if anything, the media bedwetting, they love it. There's nothing that they love more than to see people call him a fascist or a racist or compare it to Nazi MSG. That's the best thing that could happen for them because they wear it on their sleeves.
Then why are they distancing themselves?
Okay, they're distancing themselves from one comment, but this Antichrist stuff, that's like, first of all, that's like any Republican evangelical event. Not endorsing it. I've always found it creepy and weird, but that's what they do. Well, let's continue. With the Hulk Hogan, Tucker Carlson speech, almost all of it is basically around a vibe of our opponent is a joke. There is a sense of an ability. There is domination. But also what we're missing is there was a lot of like laughter and frankly like exuberance in the room for what they're projecting. I saw another electoral thesis, which is swing state voter time is over. At this point, like they've either made their decision or not. This is just purely about driving out the base. And with that regard, I mean, look, I've spent too much time now in Republican areas. I've talked about this previously, and some GOP people will hate this. There is a deep element of Trump support, which is on the nose and, for lack of a better word, crass. Like in 2020, I remember I told the story a lot. I was driving through, rural Nevada, and I just saw this gigantic sign this farmer had, and it just said, Trump, fuck your feelings. And I've thought about that sign a lot because I think that is everything. I was recently in Pennsylvania at like one of those pumpkin patches or whatever, and there's literally like grown men walking around with like F your feelings t-shirts and I'm voting for the convicted felon bumper stickers with truck nuts, as we'll get to. There is a deep element of that. And those people love this. And you can hate it if you want, but they like it. It's the whole MAGA, Mima. There's are you offended yet? I'm a white Christian male. Like, does that piss you off? That is a deep part of Trump culturalism, which is aimed directly at the beating heart of institution and of Washington. So I see this as the apotheosis of MAGA. The question in my mind, is it 2022 or is it 2016? In general, for Trump, this stuff doesn't stick. It usually doesn't hurt. This whole fantasy about Latino and Black men, I mean, we've talked about this before. It's nice to win a couple more percent, but the vast majority of the electorate, some 74, 75% is white. 55% of those people, no college degree. Median voter in this country, 55-year-old white dude.
Yeah, but
they're culturally, this aligns most with them.
Offended by this whole situation is a lot of those white college educated
okay, but
suburban
they're Democrats
voters.
already, right? I mean,
they're
going to come
they're
out
actually
and vote.
not. I mean, that's where, listen, I think you're right that this is the kind of beating heart apotheosis of MAGA. And that's what I find so disturbing. I think the deal, the implicit deal that Trump has with his supporters is basically, you give me unending loyalty. And listen, if you watch this and you didn't think that this was like, worship of a cult hero, I don't know what you were looking at. You give me unending loyalty, and I will give you permission to indulge the ugliest parts of yourself. That's what was on display here. I mean, Tucker came close to saying it. He said something to the effect of, what we love about Trump is he's given us permission to tell the truth, which is, of course, preposterous when you look at a guy in Donald Trump who probably lies more than like literally any other political figure we've ever seen. But what he means by that is now, like, we can tell the racist joke about Black people and watermelons or, call Puerto Rico a pile of garbage. We can label our political opponents as the enemy within and threaten to turn the military on them, or label them literally the Antichrist or the devil, or as one MAGA-supporting evangelical pastor has been calling her, like, the Jezebel spirit. We can do all of those things. We don't have to pretend that we have this veneer of polite society. And it's really not about policy, because we've seen him be all over the map. We've seen this policy platform this time around totally different than what it was in 2016. At this same event, you had people who were, spouting policy positions that were totally at odds with each other. Rudy Giuliani calling all Palestinians terrorists and, cheering for war hawkishness. And then Tulsi Gabbard goes up there and is like, oh, Trump is the anti-war candidate. It doesn't have to be coherent because it's not about that policy. So I don't know what the electoral impact will be. I don't think that this served the end that you and I both were saying that Trump had. His goal in the final days was to humanize himself and to make it feel preposterous that he was, this sort of like dictatorial, authoritarian, fascist figure. I don't think that this helps him in that regard. Is it a game changer? I don't know. But to me, it's just more, it's less about the electoral impact and more just about what this movement actually promises to deliver. A core promise that he's making that he talked a lot about here. And actually, we can play a little bit of the Trump mashup. I don't know if it includes this part or not. But something he's repeatedly promised is to use the Alien Enemies Act of, 1798 or whatever,
Alien
which was
sedition,
last used to justify internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. That's a promise that he makes. He talks about the enemy within. This is like a core part of what's being cheered here. And so, I think it's ugly. I think it's disturbing. And as I said before, I think the core promise is you can wear your fuck your feelings shirt. You can say all of the ugly things that you would normally say in private, it can now be out in the open. And that's what this is a celebration
this is again, though, where you're seeing it as disturbing. And I'm just looking at it analytically. What it comes from is people feel truly like the Washington establishment, media, institutions, et cetera, not only have left them behind, and I'm not even talking about economically, it's almost purely culturally. And their rage has now been bubbling for almost 25 years. So this is a logical and frankly, very predictable and political expression of that.
I think there's a lot to that. I also think that rage can be directed towards, the corporate CEOs and billionaires and elite class that have created vast inequalities in this country. Or it can be directed at, a group of vulnerable migrants to be scapegoated, which, I think is really ugly.
This is a very common talking point. The fact is
it's
that—
a reality.
Yeah, but Democrats have tried it. And the truth is that people don't like when millions of illegal immigrants come to their country. That's not scapegoating. It's a pure fact. No country on earth would accept the level of illegal migration that we've had. And they rightfully blame a lot of elites for washing that away and just saying, oh, it's actually not a problem. It doesn't matter if your community gets totally flooded or whatever. We've had this debate a million times. The point is
to pretend like the whole problem in this country is immigrants is preposterous.
Well, a big problem
and it's ugly.
Is illegal immigration. And most people believe that. In fact, if you look at, you're talking about alien and sedition. If there was an Axios poll or whatever, and it was how many Americans support putting illegal immigrants in camps and deporting them? It was 47%.
But Saagar,
it was even the vast majority of independents.
So
people think illegal migration is a disaster.
Your electoral point. I'm really not disputing your electoral point. Although I do think that the polling on immigration is a lot more complex than you say. Because if you ask them also, should there be a pathway to citizenship for people who are here who are undocumented, they also say yes. And they definitely don't support let's totally close our borders and have net zero migration. So putting the electoral point aside, though, it's a moral point. I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong. I think it's ugly. I think it's an inaccurate picture of where the problems in this country actually stem from. I think it's cheap to take shots at people who are, largely powerless, who are oftentimes escaping, systems of persecution that our country basically, set up. Many of the migrants who are coming here are fleeing from countries that we have incredibly onerous sanctions on. So yeah, I think it's cheap, it's ugly, and it's wrong. The electoral point, we'll see how it works out. Next week, we'll have an answer to that very quickly. But, my fear is that it actually is too effective, that it does work, that there is a large appetite for it. But I'm also not convinced of that yet.
Fair enough. I guess I would just say you're free to morally object, but it's a democracy. People get to vote how they want. And I don't generally believe in like tissing at people and saying, oh, it's actually not a problem. Like, we should hear what it is. Like, look, do I live my life with a Your Feelings t-shirt and truck nuts? No, I don't. And honestly, I don't have a lot of like, I don't really get it, period. But I can anthropologically look at them and be like, okay, well, there's something going on here. And for me, like full MAGA, basically what that rally was, is a political and cultural expression of, frankly, a very ignored force, and of one which people feel is not accurately reflected in their higher institutions of culture, media, and at a certain point, like, you do have to, if it wins, people should ask a lot of questions about how did that happen? What exactly led to this? If you want to make that corporate argument, I mean, frankly, look, I don't even disagree, but the truth is that people don't care. I hate to say it, but every time that they've tried the so-called deliverism and this argument, especially in the face of mass illegal migration, it's rejected almost entirely, to the extent that Democrats have won any ground. It's with rich, college-educated whites who are culturally look at the truck nuts and the Fuck Your Feelings t-shirt and are repulsed by their fellow American equally as the other person.
That's kind of a wild thing to say, though, when Republicans, when was the last time they even won the popular vote?
2004.
So,
yeah.
I mean, you act like this is the vast majority of the country. Number one, I mean,
okay, but it's pretty damn close.
Democrats,
and even in the electoral college.
Number one, I mean, but that's pretending like the only thing anyone cares about is immigration. Number one, Democrats have embraced a very hawkish, but to pretend like, the anti-immigrant position is one that isn't held by elite politicians is at this point preposterous. It's my view that doesn't exist among elite politicians. You don't hear it from Democrats at this point whatsoever.
Yeah, but you heard it 2 years ago, 5 years ago.
Number two, like, there's this posturing like this is this overwhelming majority that's being ignored, and it's like, no, actually, it is a minority, as evidenced by every election since Donald Trump has been on the scene, where he has never won the popular vote, and where Republicans lost in 2018, lost in 2022, et cetera. And so it also overstates how popular this mode of politics has been proven to be. So, like I said, listen, I'm really not making an electoral point because I'm humble about, I don't know what's going to happen next week. Maybe people love calling Puerto Rico an island of trash, and love calling for immigrants to be rounded up and put in camps, and love, saying Kamala Harris is the Antichrist, or at least just, are happy to ignore it for whatever reason. That could certainly be the case. I'm making the point that, immigrants are not the problem in this country. They are not the reason why, by and large, housing prices are high. They are not the reason why it's so hard to afford healthcare. They are not the reason why education costs have skyrocketed so dramatically. They are, yes, there is an issue with we need to get the border under control. I personally think we would actually be better off as a country if we let in far more legal immigrants than we have. But, I just think that this direction for the country is ugly, bad, and wrong.
Okay,
that's my bottom line.
Again, I think that's fair. I've made various counter arguments as to why, but in general, again, you want to listen to people and you don't want to try and override their concerns. And I fundamentally believe, and I actually tweeted this the other day, I don't think it's the economy stupid. I think it's immigration stupid. I think that if Trump wins this election, and specifically if he also wins a popular vote, which I think there's a 27% chance, according to Nate Silver, it will be the clearest mandate and or electoral signal in modern history, especially because a lot of the retconning of 2016, if we go back and look, if there was a study done by the CSPI, I want to say, we talked about it in 2020, where the vast majority of people who voted for Trump did so because of immigration. And I've just come around to the fact that immigration is the singular defining issue of the Republican Party. I think abortion is now the defining issue. Either of those two irreconcilable questions will be determined on election day as to what it is. And democratically, it does need to be solved, or at least found like some sort of status quo, like we did previously in eras. Because otherwise, if you care about taxes or whatever, the vast majority of people these days are not voting on that. They can claim what they want. I've seen too much swing state data on immigration for Republicans. It is literally the #1 thing that they're running ads on.
For Republicans? No, it's not.
No, on,
the Republicans have reduced their ad spending on immigration. They're predominantly spending money on trans panic and taxes, economic case.
I disagree with that because the trans ad is all about illegal immigration. It's specifically, when you watch it, they're like talking about transgender surgeries for illegal migrants from the clip of 2019. I mean, look, you've said it before too. A lot of that is just coding Kamala as too liberal. Yeah. Is that immigration, trans, whatever? I mean, at the end of the day, it's not economic. I know that one. On Democrats, they're trying with taxes. We talked about with Logan last week, but a huge part of it is just abortion too. So, what does the mandate say if Kamala wins? I would say if Kamala wins, that the mandate is actually that this MAGA, F your feeling stuff does not land in the way that I think it does. And people should be very humble about that too, which they won't. I think you're right. They'll say that the election was stolen, but vice versa. If that wins, people should really take a step and be like, okay, what's going on here? Why did this happen?
Yeah, maybe. Although it's also like, the election's probably going to be decided by like a tiny sliver of votes.
Maybe, yeah.
So, there will be many things right into that.
There's nuance to everything. Should I say that 90% of people agree with me or with you? Of course not. Okay?
Yeah, I'm just saying, I think there's a tendency sometimes in an election that's very narrow to read into that, like, oh, the public overwhelmingly thinks this or the public overwhelmingly thinks that, when it's really like, 20,000 people in Wisconsin or whatever.
Fair point.
So I don't think that our deep divides in the country, I don't think we'll learn anything much more profoundly different about the deep divides that exist in the country, depending on whether this is a narrow win by Trump or a narrow win by Kamala.
All right.
Should we hear?
Do you want to play Trump? I was just going to skip it.
All right.
So to me,
it's the same shit that he said.
Here's the thing. To me, Trump is a secondary character almost for this, because Trump himself and what he says does not matter, as we see at the rally. You can be anti-war and you can say the Palestinians, what did he say, are raised at age 2 years old to slaughter people. The contradiction is the point. The contradiction is the fact that the cultural saying fuck you to the elites, that's it. That's basically it.
That's not to the elites.
Okay, fine.
It's to like vulnerable immigrants.
Fine, to elite tastemakers who think that it's okay to have 12 million people illegally let in your country, or who don't think it's that big of a deal, or whatever. It's about, even culturally, to the extent, I've talked about this before, you can't turn a TV on without seeing like some transgender couple or whatever in a TV show shoehorned in for no reason. It's annoying. It is annoying. Right? Because it's obviously a social agenda of which is held by a small sliver of the country.
A social agenda of
trying to be imposed
people
on
as they
vast majority of people. Well, no. Okay,
people don't hate trans people the way you think that they do, Saagar.
I don't think that people hate trans people. I don't hate trans people. I think people should be able to do what they want. I don't like gender ideology, and specifically the way that it's messaged towards children. Or, we haven't covered this yet, but there was a landmark study about puberty blockers that somehow got held up at the NIH because it happened to prove that it didn't work so well for the people who do that. Those are legitimate issues. And that's my point, is that
But you didn't start with that. You started with seeing a transgender couple in a commercial.
Which is what? Which is a signal of what?
Which is a signal of, hey, it's cool to be who you are. No big deal, which is something that most Americans agree with, which is why the transgender panic in 2022 didn't pan out, because people were like, all right, whatever.
Because they care more about abortion.
Because they care more about other stuff. Because,
I didn't say it's the only issue.
Megyn Kelly out there being like, oh, high school athletes, transgender high school athletes is my #1 issue. Like, that's an insane fringe view.
Yeah,
but it actually is held. Yeah. I don't think you do hold that view. But that is like a kind of a core belief. Like, she gets a lot of praise for that in the Republican Party. And, so that's become a center of energy among this group as well. But anyway, we're getting far afield now.
The trans thing was just a metaphor for the idea that social liberalism dominates at the very commanding heights of the American culture, from Disney to Wicked or whatever, and that people are annoyed by it to the point where, they like the MAGA apotheosis because they want those people to cry tears and to feel bad. I sympathize. I understand that feeling. Do I think it's all that productive? No, not necessarily. But, it's politics, right? We have to learn a little bit from what Vox Populi, is kind of trying to send a signal on. And that's what I would hope that people take away if Trump does win the election. Unfortunately, I don't think that that's necessarily the case. But that's kind of why I say Trump is not, what he says doesn't matter. He's a figure. He is it is like a lightning rod or whatever for whatever cause that pisses people off in the way that you want to. I think immigration is the bigger part of that, but it's a big tent, for grievance. That explains why Rudy and Tulsi and RFK and all these people can be pro-Trump all at the same time, and the internal contradictions are the point. I increasingly believe that about MAGA. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.